Excellent. Welcome, everyone. My name is Jonas Moberg. If you don't know it, I'm the CEO of the Green Hydrogen Organization, and it's great to have you all here. And it is, for us, really quite almost historic to be able to launch this green hydrogen standard that our board recently approved under our chairman, Malcolm Turnbull's leadership, as he mentioned this morning. You should all have the standard. If not, it's lying just outside the room. It looks like this. This is what we're launching today. Why is this so important? We'll come to hear about that in a moment. But essentially what this standard is it sets a definition of what is green renewable hydrogen. It makes it clear that green hydrogen should not have more CO2 emissions than maximum a kilo. That is where the starting point, and then hopefully it will be lowered over time. In the briefest summary, this standard also has some ESG requirements, some requirements for developers to make sure that also environmental, social, and governance aspects are considered and are respected when it comes to human rights, water use, land use, and so on. The standard also has a provision for developers setting out that the social development goals, the SDGs, needs to be considered. In other words, if you do a project, explain from the beginning what kind of potential positive impact you have on the development goals. Now we're going to hear from 4 companies and a civil society group, a think tank, a little bit why all of this is important and what some of the challenges are ahead of us. And we are utterly delighted that you've joined, and your companies and a number of others that are represented here and beyond have put quotes in to a press release and so on that is being issued just as we speak. Now, really grateful to have you all here, and I will ask you in a moment to very, very briefly explain what the business model is or what the company you're coming from. So the audience knows who you actually are, because you can tell that much better than I am. Then we'll come back to why a standard or standards are important and so on and so forth. So let's have a couple of quick rounds. And I think we have to start with the only woman here, Julie Shuttleworth, the CEO of Fortescue Future Industries. Welcome.
Thanks, Jonas. Good to see everybody here. Welcome. I'm Julie. I'm from Fortescue Future Industries. We're the green energy arm of Fortescue Metals Group, one of the world's largest mining companies. And we've got 2 key objectives. The first is to decarbonise Fortescue's operations by 2030. We're leading by example, showing that heavy industry can decarbonise. And our second objective is to make 15 million tonnes of green hydrogen by 2030 to provide the green energy that the world so desperately needs. And to underpin that, we're developing technologies, manufacturing capability, and a fantastic team, of which many are here today. Thank you, team, for being here. And we're really leading the effort to abate global warming.
That's excellent. Thank you so much, Julie. And I think most of you have understood that you heard from Andrew Forrest. That's her chairman, founding chairman, and Julie's obviously the CEO. Great. Rafael Mateo Alcala next, please.
Good afternoon to everyone, and thank you for the invitation to this panel.
I think you need to flick the...
Okay. Good afternoon to everyone, and thank you for the invitation to share with you this panel. Let me briefly to talk about Acciona Energía. Acciona Energía is the greenest utility in the world. 7 years ago, carbon neutral, 7 years ago, operating 12 gigawatts in almost 20 countries, no emissions, 0 emissions. We are using all kind of renewable technology, solar, wind, biomass, CSP storage, and also green hydrogen. We are part of the transition, leading the transition. So for us, when we are talking about colors, there is just one color, that is green. So this is the discussion is very easy for us. We are always talking about the green solution for the electricity, for electrification of the electricity uses, or same for the substitution of natural gas using hydrogen, but just green hydrogen with a very good standard in terms of emission.
Excellent, thank you very much. And moving straight on to you, Arturo Gonzalez, CEO of Enagas, and I guess, yeah, pretty local, we would have to say.
Thank you, Jonas, and good afternoon, everyone. As you said, I'm CEO of Enagas. Enagas is the Spanish gas system TSO, the transmission system operator. So we own and operate the regasification plants, the storages of gas, and the gas pipeline network. So our relationship with hydrogen is twofold. First, we are the ones that intend to start building the future hydrogen network, and we expect we will become someday the leading HNO in Spain, the hydrogen network operator in Spain, building the main infrastructures for storage and transportation of hydrogen. But then we have an affiliate, which is Enagas Renovable, and we are being very active to promote new projects for producing and marketing green hydrogen, renewable hydrogen molecules. So we intend to be active in both sides of the business. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you very much. And on the corporate side, the last one, Henrik Henriksson, yeah, please.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Henrik Henriksson. I'm the CEO of a company called GH2 Green Steel. We are a startup starting our first project up in northern Sweden, where we will produce green steel by providing free platforms. It's green hydrogen that we produce ourselves, it's green iron, and the green steel. We're doing that where we have access to renewable energy at a favorable cost, and that way we can reduce the CO2 with some 95% compared to the traditional route. Our second project is down here in Iberia in a partnership together with Iberdrola. That's short.
Thank you very much. And we've heard a little bit about coming out of heavy industry, and the same goes for you, I guess, having been the CEO of one of the world's largest truck manufacturers for many years. We look forward to hearing more. Lastly, we have from a think tank on, if I can use its English translation, in sustainable development and research, Sebastian Trier is its executive director. And I think we also must acknowledge that our host, Deputy Prime Minister Teresa Ribera, who's joining us soon, is your predecessor in this distinguished job.
This makes me twice honored to be here, of course. The second reason why I'm honored is really to try and be the representative of, as you said, civil society and think tanks in this panel. So I do try to speak for all. I'm not mandated by them. But definitely what we do at IDRI is to try and play the role of scientific diplomacy in international climate negotiations. And I think voluntary initiatives like this one are very important for those global negotiations. But we also help national experts develop 2050 long-term deep decarbonization pathways that are specific to national contexts. And it's based on that we try to be the critical friends of those initiatives, trying to see how we can relate global standards like these to what's the specific decarbonization pathway that is both compatible also with nature and with the reduction of inequality. So the SDG alignment of these decarbonization pathways. And so I'll try to be the critical friend here.
Thank you very much. And by all means, be as critical as you want. We need the criticism. And maybe on that note, also just to tell everyone that while the standard was approved by our board, there were very extensive public consultations, and we sought input from a very wide range of stakeholders and held public consultations and so on. So by the time the ink had dried, it had been through a fairly wide consultation, as I said. Now, why do we need this sort of stuff? Maybe I could ask again to begin with you, Julie.
Dennis, the planet is cooking and we need to take action. And that action needs to actually reduce and eliminate emissions. And that's why this green hydrogen standard is so important. It calls out greenwashing. It calls out all the colors of hydrogen and focuses on emissions. And the consumer, the customer, needs to know how many carbon emissions are emitted for each kilogram of hydrogen that they're buying. And the other important fact about this standard is the focus on sustainability, communities, environment, human rights. And this lines up exactly with what Fortescue Future Industries is doing. Our priority focus is first on human rights, second on the environment, and third on commercial. And when we look at human rights, what we do into every single agreement we have with every government around the world is make sure we're focused on eliminating modern slavery, on eliminating forced marriage and child marriage, and making sure there's equal education opportunities for girls and boys and equal employment opportunities for women and men. And so we're fully supporting and committed to this green hydrogen standard, and we're looking forward to certifying our green hydrogen from our 50 million tonnes of green hydrogen projects that our teams are currently working on. Thank you.
That's great. Can I ask more or less the same question to all of you? And maybe it makes sense to again go to you, Artur and Rafael, to ask. I mean, Acciona has a long track record of renewable energy, of marketing, of selling this. It's part of your system and DNA. Why is the standard for green hydrogen important to your company?
Well, it's because we need to make a very clear difference between the different kind of colors. Let me remember when many years ago, 20 years ago, probably the industry was talking about clean coal. Please, the coal has never been clean in terms of CO2 emissions. So we need to be very careful about how to define the different kind of colors. So the blue hydrogen is emitting methane, and we are now in Europe, especially in Europe, many countries, but Europe especially, suffering the mistake of having an energy transition based in a product that we don't have. Europe is importing 250 billion euros every year in imported fuel, imported gas. So we can't do the same mistake again, basing the new hydrogen economy in hydrogen coming from a product from gas that we don't have. So the electrification, the transition means renewables for the electricity and green, pure, full green hydrogen for the difficult to abate sector. Green is not the same than clean. Green is much better. So this is for us the standard. We need the standard in order to make the difference between the green and something that is not exactly the same.
You're saying so many interesting things, and obviously things we like to hear. Can you please elaborate a little bit more on this? How do you think that we should best take on that fight? If we have good definitions, if we have a good standard and so on, how do we then take on some of those other interests that you've been identifying?
Well, we need to have a good standard first in order to direct better the financial resources. Let me put an example. We started with the operation of the first pure green hydrogen plant in Europe, jointly with Enagas in Mallorca. Is the only one that is operating in Southern Europe with the economical contribution from the European Union. We are using green electricity, and we are demonstrating that. Let me say that the electrolyzer is using 2 PV plants. One of the PV plant is feeding the electrolyzer. The other one is selling the electricity to the grid. And at night, the electrolyzer is buying this electricity from the grid, just to demonstrate that the electrolyzer is operating 24 hours based in green electricity. It's not just a question of a standard. You need to have an accreditation, and you need to have a methodology for demonstration. In our case, we are using blockchain. We design and we patented the design of green hydrogen blockchain in order to warranty the traceability of each molecule of the green hydrogen is coming from renewables. It's not coming from the grid, because the grid is many kind of electricity is living in the grid.
Yeah, I was going to come to Henrik, but would you like to come in?
After Henrik.
Okay, Henrik, you've started essentially with an idea, a clean sheet and some money. How does this resonate with you?
No, but I think the standard will be just as important for us. I mean, where we are at the moment, we are financing our projects. We are raising some 4.5 billion euro for the first venture up in northern Sweden, building 2.5 million ton of production to be up and running then in 2025. To be able to finance this, we need to secure customer contracts, which means that we need to make contracts that are firm, that can work as a collateral to the banks. Do you think it's good then to have a definition of what is green hydrogen? Of course it is, because then we can agree with our customers in the legal contracts of what is it we actually are selling. So I would say that it has a practical impact on us getting off the ground as we speak today. So I think that is one example of where the standard is applicable. The other one is that our customers, they are all global companies. They have a global production system, they have a global product system, many of them in automotive, but also in white goods and in the construction industry. They cannot sort of, with their ambition, which is linked to science-based targets, when they've committed themselves to not only scope 1 and 2, but also upstream scope 3, they cannot live with sort of different rules in different parts of the world. They need to have sort of one framework that they can follow because they have one product portfolio and one product system. And that is something that I can relate to from my previous job in the heavy commercial vehicle industry. The standards that are having a global frame are essential because you do not do business local anymore.
You started off by, thank you very much. You started off mentioning the need for bankable offtakes, if you like.
Yeah.
That obviously means that going to the banks. Now, do you have some good advice to us for how we help to make that relationship and that path to those bankable offtakes using the standard happen faster?
Yeah, I think it is to obviously engage with your customers early and make sure that you have this framework as a backdrop that you can use to communicate. I mean, that creates like a strong reference. It's not something you come up with yourself. I think then the other thing is to engage in these dialogues with your customers and make sure that you, of course, create a definition around the product and the price and the commercial conditions and so on. And to zoom out on that, I would say that in essence, what we have achieved to do is to create the market for green steel in Europe by creating a definition of that, which sort of is hard-coded, connected back to a definition of green iron and a definition of green hydrogen. And by defining a market for green steel and a definition of that, and also a price premium compared to the brown steel and a price position, we are able actually to create our own offtake. We create our own offtake of green steel, which allows us to create our own offtake of our own green iron, which creates an offtake for our green hydrogen. And to my knowledge, I think this is a good method to try to speed up the transformation, that you actually need to look a little bit further backwards and forward in the value chain. And then standards are important because they will sort of create that framework for you.
Fantastic. Hard-coded back to the standard definition. I think that surely is a very neat summary to much of this conversation, because of course, and if you actually look at the standard here, you will see that it's set up in such a way that it's a standard for green hydrogen and its derivatives also. So we are after this starting the work on a protocol that would add on top of the green hydrogen standard the bit for example, green ammonia, so that again you get to that hard-coded back to aspect, not just when it comes to green steel, but a wide range of applications. So you've been waiting for a long time.
No problem. I was listening to very interesting things. So Now, I just wanted to bring another aspect to the conversation. You know that after Russia invaded Ukraine, the EU issued on March the 8th this Repower EU communication, of which probably a final version will be approved just tomorrow by the European Council. In that, the European Commission increases the ambition of green hydrogen consumption in Europe by 2030 from 5 million tons a year to 20 million tons a year. 10 millions produced in Europe, 10 millions being imported from third countries. So my point here is that a good standard is needed to accelerate the process as much as possible, reducing risks, reducing technical barriers, reducing costs, giving confidence to all the actors in the market, and allowing for imports and exports of hydrogen with warranties of origin. I think this is very important. So I think it's very necessary that these kind of initiatives are coordinated with other bodies doing similar efforts, in particular in Europe, and these new entities that are going to be developing the national warranties of origin system. I think this is absolutely crucial, because if not, we will be doing several times the same job. And I just wanted to say to Rafa that probably the future hydrogen network will be based on the current gas network in many aspects. And a country like Spain, with a very flexible and reliable gas infrastructure, will be in a very good situation to evolve into a very efficient hydrogen network as well.
Thank you very much. And maybe I can pick up on that comment. Obviously, there are a number of different efforts to create standards in this space. Some are very keen to have very generous definitions, others a bit less so. And as you say, we'll hear from the European Commission tomorrow. We of course, have a very strong belief here in complementarity. You obviously start by following the law in the jurisdiction where you operate. That's basic, that's a given. And the standard is very much written with that in mind, and also in mind of becoming a voluntary scheme following the rules that are being set up by the EU. Let's, however, also bear in mind that some of those things are going to take time. And we hear a need and an interest from you all to be fast. So it is going to be a bit messy, but we will do what we can. And we hear the same from others to work together to make sure that the patchwork starts to come together into one coherent system, if you like. Sebastian, you're the only person that are sort of a representative of civil society here. Much of these efforts are about, frankly, building trust, credibility for the way we think that the energy transition and climate disaster needs to be avoided. With that in mind, what do you think when you hear all of this?
Well, I must confess, I'm thinking of another experience that I have about a completely different setting, which is the food system transformation and the 4 per 1,000 initiative. So you might not know anything about that. That was launched in 2016 at the COP22 in Marrakesh, but that was really a kind of a voluntary initiative in a very tense context and very politically important context like the food system transformation. So very similar to what we are living here with the pressure on top of that of the Ukraine war on the energy transition. And we, as IDRI, were trying to not just speak for the scrutiny of civil society, but try to strike a balance between the necessary very high ambition in the sustainability of the standard, and at the same time, the capacity for the standard to be attractive enough for projects to enter in the standard and then prove that it's feasible to comply with the requirements of the standards. And we try to strike a balance by developing a reference framework that could be both accounting for all the important dimensions that are necessary to some extent what you develop in this standard about SDG alignment, SDG performance, to put it on the table as something that is impossible to avoid to talk about, but then trying to see how projects could actually make the step and account for that. And I think that's also the type of balance that I think you try to strike with that effort to be very stringent on carbon footprint, but then also say there are other dimensions that are difficult to account for, how you align with SDGs on a local basis, how you go beyond ESG, how you account for additionality. And there I see your effort to not be just requiring, but also expecting things and go forward. I think this is particularly important in what I heard from the beginning of this conversation here, is that it's very complicated to this green hydrogen standard, because you can't completely base your standard on the production side, because you need to account also about the demand side. And that's, I think, what Henrik was also saying. And that's the complicated, but also the beauty of this standard. And who, if a project developer from the production side might not want to be held accountable for the use side, but that's going to be to some extent necessary. And I think the standard tries to strike a balance also around that. So I would explain why this is so important. I think we heard that green and affordable hydrogen will be precious. To some extent, it needs to develop fast, but it will be scarce in the end. So that's why we need to also look at priority users. That's my summary of it. So to be short, because I could go into details, I'd like at some point to come back to the idea of SDG alignment, because I think there is something very strong behind that. But basically what I would say is that we are from what we see at IDRI, the very strict emphasis on carbon footprint is extremely important. It's really that's the very good point, and we would be keen to continue working with you on what it means on the other issues. Two last points. Definitely, I think it's very important. The first thing is that these standards do not make sense if they are thought separately or independently from policy making. And I think you just ended up on that. It needs to be, those voluntary standards need to be designed in anticipation of future policies, but also working with regulations. And I think that's something that's apparent on the additionality part of your standard, where you, to some extent, say that the project might do some things about power purchase agreement that might be actually in the European regulation. So I think these connections are extremely important. And the last thing is definitely what I think is extremely important for this standard that tries to be very high on the sustainability ambition is that it needs to be credible for civil society and investors. And that, I think, that's exactly what you were aiming at, while at the same time not deterring projects to get tested and show that it's feasible to comply with the standards. And I think this is why I would insist on a kind of a learning process. I think you say that on the carbon footprint, saying 1 ton of avoided CO2 equivalent per kilogram of H2. I think that's the if I'm not mistaken in the units, the threshold, and you want to get it down. And that's something that I think you want to ensure both predictability, but continued ambition. I think you might use your governance board to also ensure that on the other dimensions, you can ensure more ambition, something that are expected could be required at some point when you will have been able to show that it's feasible to account for SDG alignment, for instance, that at some point it becomes compulsory. Yeah. I think that's the type of learning process that would be extremely important on those sides.
Excellent, thank you. I would like to ask one more question to all of you, and that is, okay, we know more or less what you and why you need it from the company side. We now are moving in towards piloting the standard, fine-tuning it. We'll be working together with as many of you as possible in doing that. We know the road towards bankable offtakes and so on. What do you, from the private sector, want from the enabling environment, from people like the Green Hydrogen Organization, from governments, from Sebastian's think tank, and so on? What can we do to make it all happen better, faster? But before you answer that question, Sebastian, you wanted to say something about the SDGs as well. So let's come back to you straight away and deal with that aspect.
No, I think I would add that if you asked if I could be critical, but I don't feel I'm here on a completely a role of scrutiny. But some of the things that are extremely important for me is really the local environmental impacts. I believe a lot of what we hear in Europe is that we hear lots of players in Europe betting that there will be some imports of hydrogen from Northern Africa. And this to me is really asking a lot of questions, both on the local environment, but also on SDGs. What I mean by that is, of course, water resources availability. It would not make sense to desalinate water with a lot of energy to produce hydrogen. I mean, that's something I've been working on water scarcity in Tunisia. So this is dear to my heart to understand how we do not unbalance something that is extremely critical, the way scarce water resources are allocated for different purposes. And so that's something that I think could be a little bit more stringent, because that's going to be very actively discussed also in Spain, I believe, definitely, because with climate change, water scarcity is something that is going to be increasingly important in many of the areas where we have a lot of sun. The other point is really to say, I think to some extent you go beyond ESG by really looking at, and I just say it's very important to look at human rights, IPLs, indigenous people and local communities. That's very important, and it's explicit. But I think it's interesting that you go further on trying to look at the SDG performance. And what I want to say is that a lot of the projects need to be assessed in order to understand to what extent they primarily contribute to local sustainable development. In many countries in Africa, we have think tanks in Africa working on the access to energy for industrialization of those countries. The idea is to first contribute to access to electricity there before exporting hydrogen to other countries. And I think that discussion about SDG alignment is primarily a discussion about how the hydrogen project is embedded in other supply chains. And I really come back to what Henrik was saying. We need to think of the embeddedness of those projects into the supply chains of clean industry, green steel, etc. And that's basically locally also important, and not necessarily just thought as something that you would directly export. And I think in that regard, SDG alignment is really not very complicated, because it's about this embeddedness in different supply chains.
It's a very important point. And I think, our board, it's not just that they want to make sure that projects are sound and so on. That there is a fairly simple logic here as well. A lot of these projects will require various forms of government engagement, of multilateral development banks, of risk insurance by government entities and so on. And you're not going to get those things unless you explain how you contribute to sustainable development goals and how you take these things seriously. So you may just as well get that hardwired into your project development from the beginning. Great. Now, a little bit quickly on wish list from the rest of us. Julie, you're laughing. Come on.
What we need to get the green hydrogen economy really moving forward is leadership. That's leadership from government, from private sector, from communities and all other stakeholders. We need governments to make sure we've got clear policies and legislation to enable those approvals pathways to have no blockages, so we can get the green hydrogen projects moving quickly. We need private sector to lead by example, take some risks, develop technology, get projects going, increase the scale, drive the cost down, and show that decarbonising heavy industry can be done. And then community leadership is absolutely key. We'll only go to places where the community support the projects. And the community aspect is a really important part of this standard, which is really impressive to see. Shows how important it is to have the community supporting the projects. And where you've got community leadership working with the government in provinces and states and countries around the world, we're really going to see fast action. And there's opportunities for green hydrogen in all places around the world where there's renewable resources. We're not just relying where there's minerals under the soil or oil and gas under the soil. This opens up opportunities for every country around the world. So where we see the leadership in those countries, community, government and private sector, we'll see the green hydrogen economy make opportunities for those people in those countries.
Thank you very much. Who wants to go next? Come on, don't be shy.
No one after that speech.
Come on, Henrik.
Yeah, no, but I agree with you. I think that, so let's maybe, what I can do is if you go down one level more to the standard, what we need for the standard to roll out. I think then it's about stakeholder engagement to sort of make sure that we get a buy-in to the standard. I think it's about thinking again about our customers and our customer's customer, and how do we sort of, what are they relying on? Usually they're working with certification agents and ISO and all of these kind of organizations. I think we need to link up with them, because they that's what our customers and customers will think. I think we need to do the same when it comes to the financial institutions to be able to get the funding going. Then we need to make sure that they understand our thinking behind the work that we have done, so that we start sort of engaging with the stakeholders that are gatekeepers for different sort of groups that needs to understand what we have done, that it's a great work, that they can copy it with pride and maybe improve it a little bit. And I think that's the way we will get traction globally. So I think that's on one level. The other level that we could work on together, I think, is to then, of course, spread it internationally. And the best way to do that, I think, if we as corporate organizations, we use it, we implement it, we talk about it, then there is a good chance that together with our customers that are global, that we will sort of get some sort of coordination, because otherwise there is a risk that Europe will have theirs, China will have theirs, US theirs, and so on. So I think we could be that bridge across those different wills.
Thank you so much. Can I ask, are you talking to your customer's customer?
Yeah, that's how we sell our product.
That's how you
If
sell.
you don't understand your customer's customer, you don't understand the willingness and the value that you provide with your sort of value proposition to your prime customer, you will sell too cheap or you will not sell at all. So you need to understand the business of your customer's customer. Then you can sort of move these barriers, and then you can make this transformation happen at Udwise.
Excellent. Yeah, well taken.
Thank you. 2 points from me. One is, let's bear in mind the scale of the challenge we've got in front of us to really produce a green hydrogen economy. This has to happen very quickly and very efficiently. So we need a very strong regulatory framework to create a favorable ecosystem. Let's make it reasonable, pragmatic. Let's make it simple. If we are too ambitious, perhaps we will be discouraging many initiatives that really have to start taking place, you know. So let's be very practical, very pragmatic. Let's be sure that this really begins to happen as fast as possible. And second, when we talk about SDG aspects, let's think about other aspects, other social aspects of energy transition, and let's try to cope with the different elements of a just or fair transition as a whole, because there are other elements that are having a social impact associated to energy transition. So let's try to solve these problems in a broader context. That would be my second point.
Thank you very much. Rafael.
Let me say that the energy transition is based in 2 main pillars. One is more renewables for more electrification, and the other is additionally more renewables to produce more green hydrogen additionally. So the additionality is key. So we can use the same electricity that we are doing today to produce electricity to produce hydrogen, because we are forgetting the main target, that is fighting the climate change. So we need additionality as a must in the standard. And second, we need a very short time to market technology. I'm not going to discuss now about the technology, but we shouldn't wait 15 years to have an additional nuclear to produce additional green hydrogen. The technology today with wind and solar PV is available, is 2 years or maybe less time to market, so we can do it fast.
Absolutely. Sebastian.
I personally, I don't have specific expectation from the standard for my own business. This is not the way I see it. No, I think it's extremely interesting to see. I believe we'd be happy as a think tank and with the other think tanks that are present in the room. I can't really speak for SCI or E3G, who have been extremely vocal and active in this field, right? More than us actually. But so I think there is a room for us continuing to work with you and analyze how this SDG alignment, this the way you take up this additionality concern, for instance, how that's implemented. So I would say count on us, but I can't sign for the others for continuing this conversation.
Well, thank you very much, all of you. We don't have time for questions and answers now. Tomorrow at 3:30, there is a similar session, but digging deeper into the detail, into the weeds, how the calculations are done, how we're addressing transport, scope 1, how that is dealt with, 2, and what our longer term plans are for scope 3 and so on, and how we see again this relationship with derivatives such as ammonia. All of those sorts of questions are being dealt with at greater detail at that session tomorrow. Once again, thank you so much, because this is really the best gift, the kind of buy-in that you are showing to this effort is just shows that well, it just gives us such a motivation to keep doing what we're doing and keep now pushing this out. So thank you.